Well, thanks everybody. I'm happy to be here. I'm Melissa Same, a recovered compulsive overeater. I'm in New York, and um, tonight we're going to jump into the doctor's opinion, which is like super. There's so much information in there that I'm going to try to get in there. I want to kind of hit on some important aspects of it, and what I have written before we kind of get into it is like the title that I like give this talk when I do it is I'm a distinct entity, because the doctor's opinion will mention this notion of being distinct. And I think one of the things I always like to do is give a list, right? I think lists are really helpful for people. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to hit on those things. And when they come about, I'll mention them. And then at the end, I will go over what that actual list is, the things that make us distinct. So, first of all, before I jump in and say this, for those of you who don't know me, I've recovered from what was a seemingly hopeless state. I was at, my whole life, I was battling food, whether I was, moments in a normal size body, a thinner, resembling other people size body. I was not like other people. I never have been. For as long as I remember, I've had a different way about being in this world than it seems like other people are. And it was, I've never felt when I was eating, um, whether I was eating or I wasn't eating, my mind was always locked on this, on the food, on getting more, on getting, or how am I going to withhold from eating it? How am I going to maintain that? But I never had peace. And so large part of my life, I suffered with morbid obesity. And then what happened was I reached a point, I had been in and out of the rooms of Overeaters Anonymous, but I finally reached a point where um, I knew that there was something wrong with me, and it was not just my body. I knew it, there was something off with my thinking. And that frightened me. It really scared me because I always prided myself on my thinking. I'm a smart girl. That's what I felt like. And how can a smart girl be so like stupid? I felt like when it came to this, knowing what I needed to do and being unable to do it. And what I found out was that it had nothing to do with intelligence or information, it had to do with powerlessness. I was powerless to put into application what I knew. And so when that became abundantly clear to me, for me, I became willing to surrender. I was like, I'm out of options. And what happened was I was given the correct information in a loving and supportive environment, and I got better. I got better quickly, to be honest. And so I've recovered, and I've been in a normal size body, for many years, and I've been recovered for and abstinent for over 11 and a half years. And through hard times and great times. My circumstances have had nothing to do with my recovery and my abstinence. I've remained recovered and abstinent through it all. And that's what we have to offer. That is what we have to offer. So let's jump into the doctor's opinion about what it means to be a distinct entity. And right on XXV, the first paragraph says that convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. Well, I have experience with the suffering of myself for sure. And I've witnessed not only my return to health, but the return to health of many others who have followed this path. So it's possible. And what is convincing testimony is witnessing people, seeing people who get better. That's the great convincer. And, you know, I think what's good news for someone like me that has had substantial weight loss is that my my witness, the ability to witness my return to health is very visible. And that's been a blessing. That really has been a blessing. So for me, it's usually why I show my pictures to people because it's a beginning of a convincing testimony. And it's also why we tell our stories, right? It's why we share what it was like and what it's like now, where we've been and where we are. In the second paragraph, it says, to whom it may concern. The letter is going to start off. There's a letter written by Dr. Silkworth, and it's addressed right to whom it may concern. And I would say, in my book, I wrote, Dear Melissa, instead of to whom it may concern, because I'm the one this letter is concerning. This letter concerns me, and I read it like it's written to me on a personal level. And the third paragraph talks about a competent businessman of good earning capacity was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. And I would say especially in Overeaters Anonymous, many of us have continued, not everybody, but many have continued to be able to be competent in their work, in whatever it is that they do for living financially with good earning capacity, and they're still hopeless. You can be competent and hopeless, especially compulsive eaters. And I would say that's something that makes me distinct. How can I be competent and hopeless at the same time? But I can. I never, I never failed to pay my mortgage on time. I was able to pay my mortgage. I was able to hold down a job. I know some people are not. The disease really takes them to that level, but I was hopeless and yet I was still able to do those things. I was able to pass. No one took my kids away from me. I never got a DWI. I didn't lose my license. So I appeared, even though physically I didn't look competent, I was. I was still somewhat competent. So, as part of his rehabilitation, it says now, he commenced to present his conception to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. So, we're rehabilitated by working with others. And we're actually told to tell the newcomer, to impress upon them this requirement in one of the first conversations we have with people, that this program is a 12-step program, not an 11-step program. So working with others, if you're healthy and able, it's how we get well and stay well. Now I want to sort of emphasize, there are certain times in people's lives where it might not be wise, even if you're recovered, to take on a new sponsee, right? Like in the midst of my mother dying, where my attention was focused on the assignment that God gave me, which was to be with my mother, to spend my energies there. It was not my time to be speaking on meetings for that particular moment. And it wasn't my time to be taking on a new person. So I want to make sure that although this is important, carrying the message, working with sponsees, that there are sometimes blips in our recovery periods where we might not be as actively engaged with that. And I just kind of want to say that. But for really, this is a 12-step program. And so that is another thing that makes me distinct. That working with others is how we get well and stay well. You know, I might have a problem with I don't know, my irritable bowel syndrome at times. I can get well from that and never ever have to talk to another person or help another person with irritable bowel syndrome. Basically, I take the medication and I'm okay, right? However, this particular type of illness that I have to work with others. I have to help others. I must, be in close contact with other sufferers of this particular disease, right? Okay. So this is a program. Now it says, I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. So this is a program for people who have exhausted every other method. And what I usually tell people is you can list all the methods you've tried. Like sometimes that's really in some of the step one work I do with people is I ask them, their history. When did you first determine when did you first start overeating? What are the things, what are the strategies, what are the lengths you've gone through? What other methods have you tried? And I always think what's helpful about that exercise is it begins to highlight that lack of desire was often never the problem, right? Because and let me tell you, I have tried some wonky methods. I have tried some seemingly sane methods if you are a regular person who just wants to lose weight. And I've also tried some like crazy methods, which I did because I was desperate. And I was like, okay, and I had this really strange thing for someone that I would say I'm smart, right? I'm fairly level-headed in many areas, but I had this weird thing where if it was expensive and extreme and seemed like ridiculous, I'd be all in. I'd be like, "Oh yeah, let me write a check. Let me try this one." And so I've exhausted every other method. And and that's something else that makes me distinct. That I am a person who has had to exhaust every other method. Um, on page XXVI, it says you may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. So, this letter, right, that's written, the doctor was giving them credibility. You know, credibility to whom? Credibility to a group of people who were suffering from alcoholism, who were and actually some of them newly sober, like not even years and years of sobriety, but short amounts of time sober and yet recovered. Their word is good. They become reliable sources. And I want to say that that's been my truth that, you know, when we recover and as we're recovering, we have to be honest. And someone who's honest means that their word is good, even what they say about themselves, right? Be one thing to be a reliable source of information about something else, but another entirely to have the humility to be able to be honest about myself. And I have to say that is a prerequisite for getting well. We must be honest about ourselves. And then our word becomes good and we become reliable and a gift to others, right? So, now it's going to start talking about the body of the alcoholic, and it's quite as abnormal as his mind. It says it did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality or outright mental defectives, but we are sure that our bodies are sickened as well. And then it says, this is the doctor's theory that we've got an allergy and it interests us, right? But we're laymen, which means I'm not a professional. I don't have the blood work to back up the results of this. And so my opinion might mean little, right? My opinion might not mean an awful lot, but I'll tell you, as an ex problem eater, this is the only explanation that makes good sense. It explains many things for which I could not otherwise account. So, my body is not normal. My body is abnormal. And if I don't stress this, then I'm neglecting to share some crucial information as a sponsor or as a possible sponsor or as a fellow. I'm giving the newcomer incomplete information. And while I'm not an allergy specialist, I don't have the results of anyone's blood work. I know that this explanation is the only one that makes sense. And what I can say it is like this: I have never been able to eat two cookies, ever. Why is that? Right? I don't know. It seems like I must have an allergic response to those particular foods. I've had, and nor, and here's what I've also found out for myself about this allergy: it's not just triggered by specific food ingredients, but it's triggered by specific food behaviors, which for me means eating outside my plan, eating anything spontaneously without any regard can often cause that allergic response. And what does that allergic response set off in motion? An insatiable desire for more. And that's what he's talking about, that we've got a body that reacts abnormally to food. And so then what do? Right? Well, we work on our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane. And then it's going to talk about favoring hospitalization for the alcoholic who's very jittery or befogged. So our solution is spiritual and it's altruistic. There is not a spiritual component of this program. It's not like, oh, I love Overeaters Anonymous, except, or I love the big book, you know, except the God thing. Okay, this entire book is written, the main purpose of this book is written to enable the sufferer to have a relationship with God, with power. So there are people who might say, well, I got well and I didn't need God, and that's okay. That might be true for them, but I'm gonna hold up the book at this time. You cannot be a practitioner of this specific book and take out that, because the main purpose of this specific book is just that, is a relationship with God. The God of your understanding does not have to be my defining factor of it. But make no mistake, it has to be some. So it's a spiritual program. That's this book. And this spiritual program is altruistic in nature. So we find God ultimately through becoming unselfish. And then the more we get that relationship with God, the deeper our unselfishness is supposed to grow. It feeds into one another, right? We take these steps towards altruism, towards doing things for others just for the sake of doing them. And through that, we get closer to God. And as we get closer to God, we long to do that more and more and more. That's this program. So, and then they talk about hospitalization. And so, some people have to go into treatment programs. Some people actually have to be hospitalized. I did not. For this disease, I did not have to go to a formal hospital. But I'll tell you this, I sort of did this thing, and I think it's very helpful for other people, is we kind of create our own food rehab. We can kind of create our own hospitalization. What does that mean? You know, um, Tight parameters, just like you're in the hospital, with a lot of support and structure. Not go off, get abstinent, get your stuff together, and then we'll talk. That's not what a hospital looks like. Hospital looks like I'm gonna administer to you. I'm gonna give you care. I'm gonna give you comfort. I'm gonna give you some tight parameters, right? If you're in the hospital, you're not gonna be like out, staying up late, running marathons, or even, I mean, like, look, if you're in the hospital, they actually give you a food card, where you check off what you're going to eat and you get it, right? And that's what you get. And I kind of think the same thing. So, what does that spell out? One of the ways that I practice it, as much as possible, refraining from eating out. Are there circumstances where people do eat out? Yes. But I would say social eating has to be put to the side in early recovery as much as possible. You know, um, and I would say also early recovery time means that outside distractions and outside obligations often need to take a back seat. Again, as much as possible. Of course, if you are the mother of small children, you can't ignore your children in the hopes of getting well. That certainly doesn't seem like a spiritual program of action. But for me, it meant, yeah, no, I wasn't going to be the baker for the PTA cupcake, you know, bake sale. No, not really. Nor was I going to suddenly take up a new hobby and pursue that while I was working the steps. My emphasis would be working these steps, right? Okay. And so, on XXVII, it says that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. So I might understand I will need another moral code that's different from the one that I've been living in. And we find out that actually we do get a new moral code in here, and it's generally love and tolerance. That becomes our moral code. But I can't apply it with just my intellect. You know, just like I always knew what healthy eating looked like, I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I knew what honesty was, I knew what unselfishness was, but I struggled to live within the boundaries of my own morals. I needed a higher power to help me live in agreement with my morals. The addict knows right from wrong, right? It's not like I didn't know right from wrong. I just struggled to abide by right and wrong. Lack of knowledge was not my dilemma. Lack of power is. And I would say, as soon as I said that I was willing to set aside the old way of living and begin to make an approach, I actually began to get more power to live honestly, to practice these things honestly, and they grew over time. XXVII says this: the unselfishness of these men as we've come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, community spirit is indeed inspiring. To one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field, they believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. So, unselfishness, entire absence of a profit motive, community spirit, these are the characteristics of fellows who have recovered, right? That's what a characteristic should be of good meetings, of strong fellowship, no profit, no one's looking to make money off of you, and a sense of community, a sense of belonging. Um, why are they working so hard to help others? Well, because we believe in ourselves. Like, I believe in myself, but even more than I believe in myself, I believe in the power that saved me. I believe that God did something miraculous for me. I was pulled back from the gates of death. I know that. I don't think I would be here today. I had a doctor who told me I wasn't going to make it out of my 40s. I had dangerously high blood pressure. I needed to have a surgery, and they didn't want to perform the surgery on me because of the way that my blood pressure was so out of control, and I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. And God saved me. And so that's why I believe in this. That's why I'm passionate about doing this. If God could do it for me, surely he can do it for anyone. There was nothing that made me more worthy, more unique. I think what it was I was willing. And that will be a topic we're going to discuss in the future, because I definitely think willingness is an important component here. But so again, hospitalization gets mentioned, right? There's another paragraph that talks about hospitalization. Tells me that seems pretty important, right? That seems to be a pretty important thing. Okay, so now it's going to talk a little bit more about the allergy, that the action of alcohol is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker, which means I can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. So the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class, which means that must be something that makes me distinct, right? That normal people don't get this phenomenon of craving. That's why normal people can moderate. But it doesn't occur in average temperate drinkers, average temperate eaters. Average temperate eaters can overeat sometimes. They can actually they can actually binge sometimes. They can have like a binge, and then they get it together and they're a-okay. But they don't continue. Generally, they don't continue to overeat once they're truly full. And, which I've seen people at Thanksgiving dinner, they eat way too much. All the normies do it, right? All the normal people do it. They eat way too much. Oh, they unbutton their top button. They might like let off their belt a little bit and they go, oh my gosh, I'm so full. I'm stuffed. And they're done, right? But not me, right? Because normal people receive satisfaction from normal size portions. And when they eat abnormal size portions, they are so uncomfortable that the desire to eat is like the furthest thing from their mind. They think that it would be preposterous to keep on eating. I was told that it's kind of like how I experience thirst. When I'm really thirsty, I pour myself a glass of water and I don't need any willpower. I don't need a 12-step group to keep me from drinking glasses and glasses of water. I get, my thirst gets quenched and I put the glass down. And I don't have that experience with food, and so I I can't look at what normal people do, because I don't have the normal response. So next on XXVIII says this, it's frothy emotional appeal. Seldom suffices the message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. Okay, so frothy emotional appeal doesn't work. So appealing to a compulsive overeater from an emotional standpoint is like, you know, when someone says, like, to me, I've had a lot of frothy emotional appeal. I've had people say, like, listen, my parents would say, like, you're a pretty girl. What are you doing? You're smart. Come on, you're hurting yourself. Things would be so much better for you. We'll help you. You can get it together. Like they would appeal to me from that emotion. Even my husband at one point appealed to me from emotions. I had, gained a tremendous amount of weight and he sat down with me and he spread out pictures, like hurt so much even to think about it. He spread out pictures of me from when we were first dating and he said, God, you looked so good here. You looked so beautiful here. Be great, it would be so great if you could get, I don't know if he said if you could get like that again, but, um, and that like, I mean, talk about emotion. And it didn't work. That just didn't work. It just made me feel horrible. It made me feel like a big lousy loser, terrible. And he didn't mean to hurt me, but that's what it did. It hurt me. I also had my mother-in-law sit down and tell me, and that was probably the most awful frothy emotional appeal. My mother-in-law shared with me how she lost her mother at a young age, and that how horrible it was to grow up without a mother, and that my husband actually lost his father at a young age, and she said it was horrible seeing that happen to her children, to lose a parent just like it happened to her. And she said, and Melissa, I'm looking at you and I'm scared you're going to do the same thing to my grandchildren. And like, to this day, that's brought the emotional appeal, and it doesn't work. It didn't work. What it did was it made me, I was angry with her. And as soon as she left, I ate. And I was like, how dare she? How dare she? And I look at it now and I think, I know her so well. I know that my mother in law must have practiced exactly what she was going to say to me. I can picture her. She's got a best friend across the street. I can picture her calling her friend saying, what do you think if I say this to her? I can picture it, and it must have taken everything in her to present that to me, a daughter in law that she loved. And it didn't work, right? So, what does work? You know, well, not someone sitting across from me saying, you're killing yourself. You know what works? Someone sitting across from me saying, I was killing myself and I've been saved. That's what works. You know, the other thing here is that um, we are going to need ideals grounded in a power greater than ourselves. No longer can my ideals be grounded in Melissa getting her way. They have to be ideals that are grounded in what I believe God's will is for me. And the other thing I get right here is, yeah, we're going to have to recreate our lives. This is not OA Light. This is not a program for people who just need a really good diet. This is a program for people. What makes me distinct is I needed my life recreated. I needed a brand new life. Even though, like I said to you, I was paying my mortgage on time, even though I never lost my job, I had to look at my life and say, wasn't working. If my husband had to sit me down and spread out those pictures, and that didn't help, and my mother in law had to appeal to me from that kind of angle, and that didn't help, surely my life wasn't working, right? Surely my life wasn't working. So men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. That's what we're told. That the sensation is so elusive that I cannot, I know it's hurting me, but I can't differentiate the true from the false. That my alcoholic life, my binge life, seems the only normal one. I'm restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once when I take a few bites. That's what happens to me. And what happens is, I'm just going to explain this addiction cycle. I say it's the addiction spiral. What happens is I get restless, irritable, discontent. I get this itchy on the inside feeling, like I can't find a place for myself. And the thing that I desire when I'm like that, the thing that I have longed to do is to eat. And I eat something, and other people around me who are not a distinct entity, they can do that with impunity without any of the punishing effects, but not me. So I take a bite, and then what happens is I'm off and I can't stop. And I am now in the well-known stages of a spree. And every time I have this spree, the only way that I ever emerge from it is remorseful. I have never overeaten and said, that was excellent. Now I'm good. Now I feel okay. Right? Never. So, I've never had this thing where I say, like, I've seen other people who go, oh, Oh, that was so good. That hit the spot. I have a spot that can't be hit with food, right? That's what makes me distinct. I never get. Even though I'm thinking I'm going to get satisfaction, ease, and comfort, I actually never get it. I only emerge remorseful. And I emerge remorseful and I say, that's it. I mean business this time with a resolution. I'm gonna do it this time. And yet I repeat this. I get itchy, irritable discontent, and I repeat it again and again and again. And I'd say, I've heard it explained as the addiction cycle. I think it's an addiction spiral because what we have is progressive. And so it got worse and worse. My binges took more serious lengths. They lasted longer. They required more food. They went on endlessly. They gave me very little relief. And the time I emerged remorseful became fewer and farther in between. It got harder and harder to get to that magic Monday. I couldn't get to magic Mondays anymore. The day like I'm ready to do battle, couldn't get there. It was, and so at the end for me, it was like I was like in a black dot in the middle of that spiral. Here's the greatest news of all, right? Here's where we get the solution. On the other hand, thank you, God, there's another hand. As strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, now that's what we're after. The very same person who seemed doomed. Remember, I seemed doomed, seemingly hopeless. So many problems piling up on me. I needed surgery, couldn't get it, couldn't stop eating, dangerously high blood pressure. Suddenly, I'm easily able to control my desire for food, the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. What are those few simple rules? The steps, the 12 steps. Those are the few simple rules. And I'll tell you, why is it that we're easily able to control the desire? Because the desire gets removed, almost entirely removed completely. When it does occasionally come up, I sort of say it's like this. It used to be a tiger that he used to have to find a really strong cage to keep getting in it, getting in this really strong cage. Please get the tiger in the cage so that I don't have to overeat. Now, what's happened is that tiger's not a tiger, it's a kitten. So occasionally it might show me its little claws, but I don't have to engage in battle over it. I'm easily able to control the desire. The desire is very rare and it lasts but a second, you know? So I don't respond to the ordinary psychological approach, which means, I don't respond to therapy for this problem. Therapy is great. I have nothing against therapy. It didn't work for compulsive overeating. I needed something different, right? And so this is not a problem of sheer mental control, right? Um, I would say here, I want to talk about the classification of alcoholics because, there's all different types of people, right? And it's going to talk about those that, are psychopath and those that are always going on the wagon and those that are overly remorseful and those that are unwilling to admit that they have a problem and those who try various ways. And there's all different varieties in them. Some of us seem almostly normal, except for what we do with food, right? Doesn't matter what type you are. You could be all those types, from time to time. Here's what's important, that we all have the same effect. Alcohol has, food has the same effect, that we have one symptom in common. Cannot start drinking, cannot start compulsively eating without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy, which, and here's the important thing, differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. And so, what do I suggest to people? Well, I have this list of the things that make me distinct. And basically, what I do is I take a piece of paper. I think it's a very good step one exercise. Take a piece of paper and fold it in half and make that crease crisp. Fold it so you've got a nice crisp crease there. Okay. Open it up. On one side, I'm going to list the things that make me distinct. I can be both competent and hopeless. Working with others is how we get well and stay well. I've exhausted every other method. My body is abnormal. I must constantly think of others. We're told that that's part of our thing, that we're altruistic. I have to have tight parameters around food. That's my truth. Know what your parameters are and respect them. I can't eat spontaneously. That's one of my specific things I have to know about myself. I must live by spiritual principles. That makes me distinct. I have a code. I get a code in this program, love and tolerance. That's something that makes me distinct. It's not fair and unfair. The rest of the world can worry about fair and unfair. What makes me distinct is I can't worry about unfair. I have to do what's loving and tolerant. Okay? Must be entirely honest to live well and happily. That's something that makes me distinct. Something else that makes me distinct is without recovery, I struggle to live within the boundaries of my own knowledge. That's something that makes me distinct. Another thing is I experience the phenomenon of craving, that I've got a very severe allergy. Um, Another thing that makes me distinct on this list, I have a mind that tells me I don't have this allergy, or tells me that I'm making too big a deal about it, or tells me, in the worst case of all, that I don't even care. It allows me to forget that I care. Um, for me, I can't treat food like normal people. Food can be tasty, but I have to be cautious about it being my source of recreation. Um, Something else that makes me distinct, like I said, you can't appeal to me from frothy emotion. Doesn't work. Um, I must have a message of depth and weight. And here's something else that makes me distinct. I must self diagnose. Step one means that I fully concede to my innermost self. Now, I might have another problem, another health problem, but I don't have to fully self diagnose. The doctor can diagnose me. This program, I've got to diagnose myself. The diagnosis must come from within. And here's the best part. What's something else that makes me distinct? I must have an experience with the miraculous. I must have a relationship with God. Now, on the other side of that page is all the rest of the world. How they live, what they do, not my business. No, has really very little to do with me. Here's what I've also come to find out. You can take that piece of paper, you can flatten it now. By the way, I look normal. I'm a normal sized body. I wear normal sized clothes. I do normal things. If I go to the doctor, they've never told me, knock on wood, that I can't get surgery. And right, I can pass today. Sometimes I find myself in situations where people talk about obese people in demeaning ways, and it like hurts my heart. And I think they don't know me. They don't know I'm actually that woman still, right? I'm still her. So that line doesn't look like it's there anymore. But once I've made that crease, it's still there. It can never be eradicated. And my greatest difficulty has only come when I think, and I've seen it in other people, when I think that I can start hanging out on the other side of the page. And that's where I can fall into trouble. But thankfully, I'm in this group with you right now. There's 113 others in this room right now who I believe are probably on this side of the page with me. So I never have to worry about it, right? I'm certainly not alone here. The rest of the doctor's opinion talks about miraculous demonstrations of how people got well. and what happened, and that they received a search and rescue mission and got well, which is really what we hope to do for people. That really is part of what we our greatest wish is to participate in the rescuing of others. I want to just say that the end of the chapter says this, you know, that it talks about if your intention, is to ridicule, right? You might come to scoff, but perhaps he might remain to pray. And so I think many people come here annoyed, somewhat laughing about this God thing in the beginning. But in order to get well, we have to be people who remain to pray. And with that, I'll pass. Thanks.